What happens when the son of a powerful state senator walks into Judge Judy's courtroom, believing his last name is stronger than the law? Brandon Whitmore did not enter that courtroom like a man facing a serious case. He entered like a man walking into a place he already owned. Expensive suit, luxury watch, designer shoes, a smirk on his face that said he had never truly been punished for anything in his life. Across from him stood Mrs. Ezekiel, a 72-year-old immigrant landlord who had worked for decades, saved carefully, and built a small life through honest effort. She was suing him for unpaid rent and property damage, money she could not afford to lose. But Brandon thought this case was beneath him. He thought Judge Judy was beneath him. And within minutes, he would make a mistake so arrogant, so public, and so damaging that it would not only destroy his defense, it would drag his father's hidden political protection into the light. Because what Brandon did not know was this: Judge Judy had already looked deeper. She had already found the records. She had already seen the pattern. And by the time Brandon realized he was not in control, it was far too late. This was not just a rent dispute. This became a courtroom lesson about power, arrogance, intimidation, and what happens when someone finally says, "No more." The courtroom was quiet that afternoon when the bailiff called the case. Ezekiel versus Whitmore. Mrs. Ezekiel entered first. She was small, nervous, and visibly tense. She wore a simple dress and held a folder close to her chest with both hands. Inside that folder were lease papers, messages, photographs, and every piece of proof she had gathered after months of being ignored. She looked like someone who had never wanted attention. Someone who had spent her life avoiding trouble, following rules, and believing that hard work would protect her. Then Brandon Whitmore entered. He was late, not 1 minute late, not 2 minutes late, 15 minutes late. And he walked in as if everyone else should have been grateful he showed up at all. He still had sunglasses on inside the courtroom. His phone was in his hand. He did not look at Mrs. Ezekiel. He did not apologize. He did not show even the smallest sign of respect for the court. He moved toward the defendant's table slowly, casually, like this was an annoying appointment someone had forced onto his calendar. Judge Judy watched him in silence. She saw everything: the sunglasses, the phone, the smirk, the relaxed arrogance, the way he treated the elderly woman beside him as if she did not matter. And Judge Judy knew exactly what kind of person was standing in front of her. Brandon Whitmore was 28 years old. His father, Senator Richard Whitmore, was a powerful political figure with influence, money, and connections. Brandon had grown up inside that world, the kind of world where problems disappeared, calls were made, lawyers arrived, and consequences rarely touched the right people. But this time, he was standing in Judge Judy's courtroom. And Judge Judy was not impressed by his suit. She was not impressed by his family name. And she was certainly not impressed by his attitude. Mrs. Ezekiel began speaking carefully. English was not her first language, but every word carried weight. She explained that she had rented Brandon a 2-bedroom apartment 8 months earlier. At first, he seemed polite, charming, well-dressed, confident. When she asked for references, he told her his father was Senator Richard Whitmore, as if that alone should have ended all questions. Mrs. Ezekiel did not fully understand the political importance of that name. She simply believed he looked responsible and trustworthy. For the first 2 months, Brandon paid the rent, then the excuses began. He told her his father's campaign had temporary expenses. He told her he would pay double the next month. He told her not to worry. But the money never came. Month after month passed, no rent, no serious answer, no respect. By the time she finally brought him to court, Brandon owed thousands in unpaid rent. And when she entered the apartment, the damage was worse than she imagined. There were holes in the walls. Cabinet doors were broken. The carpet had cigarette burns, even though the lease clearly said no smoking. The bathroom had graffiti. The apartment she had worked so hard to maintain looked like it had been treated with complete disrespect. She was asking for $8,500, not because she wanted revenge, not because she wanted attention, but because she wanted the court to say that what happened to her was wrong. As she spoke, Brandon sat there looking bored. He leaned back in his chair. He glanced at his phone. He smirked when she struggled to find the right words. That smirk was the first thing that truly angered Judge Judy. She leaned forward and said sharply, "Mr. Whitmore, remove the sunglasses." Brandon looked up slowly, as if the request itself was ridiculous. He took them off with exaggerated irritation and placed them on the table. "Sure," he said. "Whatever you need, Judge. Not Your Honor, not Mom, just Judge." The disrespect was clear. Then his eyes dropped back to his phone. Judge Judy's expression hardened. "Put the phone away." Brandon actually laughed. He said he was handling important work. He said his father's campaign did not stop just because he had to deal with this situation. And when he said this situation, he gestured toward Mrs. Ezekiel. Not as if she were a woman he had harmed, not as if she were a landlord owed money, but as if she were an inconvenience. The courtroom reacted immediately. Low murmurs filled the room. People shifted in their seats. Even Brandon's attorney looked uncomfortable. Judge Judy let Mrs. Ezekiel continue. The evidence was simple and clear: a signed lease, a payment record, text messages where Brandon promised payment and failed to follow through, photographs showing the condition of the apartment. Mrs. Ezekiel did not speak loudly. She did not exaggerate. She simply showed what had happened. And the more she spoke, the stronger she became. At first, her voice trembled. But as Judge Judy listened, Mrs. Ezekiel began to realize that someone in that courtroom was taking her seriously. Brandon interrupted again and again. He claimed she was wrong. He claimed the damage already existed. He claimed the entire case was being exaggerated. Judge Judy stopped him with one raised hand. "You will get your turn." But Brandon could not stop himself. Under his breath, close enough for the microphones to catch, he muttered that the whole thing was a waste of time. Then his turn came. Judge Judy asked him a simple question. "Did you sign a lease agreeing to pay $1,500 a month?" Brandon leaned back like he was about to explain something obvious. "Technically, yes," he said. "But there were verbal understandings." Judge Judy's eyes narrowed. "What verbal understandings?" And that was when Brandon began exposing himself. He said Mrs. Ezekiel understood who he was. She understood who his family was. He said payment schedules could be flexible. Flexible. Judge Judy repeated the word slowly. "You have not paid rent for 6 months. That is not flexible. That is theft." Brandon looked offended. He laughed it off, as if the word theft was too serious for someone like him. Then he made it worse. He said Mrs. Ezekiel should have been lucky to have him as a tenant. He asked if Judge Judy knew what kind of tenants usually rented in that neighborhood. The courtroom gasped. Mrs. Ezekiel lowered her eyes for a moment, but she did not break. Judge Judy's face changed. Her voice became colder. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Brandon should have stopped. His lawyer clearly wanted him to stop. But Brandon had spent his whole life speaking without consequences, and he continued. He said Mrs. Ezekiel could barely speak English. He said she should be grateful that someone from a respectable family had even rented from her. He said the exposure alone was worth something. At that moment, every person in the courtroom understood who Brandon Whitmore really was. Not just irresponsible, not just entitled cruel. Judge Judy did not shout. She did not need to. She picked up the photographs of the damaged apartment and spread them in front of her. She asked him to explain the holes in the walls, the broken cabinets, the cigarette burns, the graffiti. Brandon waved it off. He said he had parties. He called it normal wear and tear. Judge Judy stared at him. "Holes in walls are normal wear and tear?" Brandon shrugged. He said young people live differently now. He said the apartment needed updating anyway. Then he had the nerve to suggest that he might have increased the apartment's value. Judge Judy looked at him as if she could not believe he had chosen that answer. You increased the value by destroying it. Brandon leaned back again, still trying to act untouchable. He said the whole matter was ridiculous. He said his father's attorney had already offered Mrs. Ezekiel $2.00 to settle. That sentence changed everything. Judge Judy caught it instantly. Your father's attorney? Why is your father's attorney handling your debt? Brandon answered without thinking. Because his father handled these minor inconveniences. Because his father had people for this. The courtroom went silent, and then Judge Judy reached for the thick file sitting beside her. It had been there the entire time. Brandon had not noticed it, but Judge Judy had come prepared. She opened it slowly. Mr. Whitmore, she said, I did some research before this hearing. For the first time, Brandon's confidence shifted. Only slightly, but it shifted. Judge Judy began reading. In 5 years, Brandon had been sued by 4 different landlords. One case involved property damage. Another involved unpaid rent. Another was withdrawn after threatening calls. Another was sealed. Again and again, the pattern appeared. Brandon rented a place. Brandon failed to pay. Brandon caused damage. Then someone connected to his father stepped in. Cases disappeared. Records were sealed. Settlements were made quietly. People stopped talking. Judge Judy looked up from the file. 4 landlords. Nearly $20.00 in combined rent and damages. And somehow, every case had vanished before serious consequences arrived. Brandon's attorney objected, saying those past cases were irrelevant. Judge Judy shut him down immediately. They were relevant because they showed credibility. They showed pattern. They showed behavior. Then she revealed something even worse. She had contacted some of the previous landlords. Several said they had been approached by someone from Senator Whitmore's office. They were offered money. They were asked to sign non-disclosure agreements. They were warned that continuing against the son of a powerful senator might create problems for them. Brandon's face changed pale to angry. He said those were private matters. Judge Judy did not blink. This is my courtroom. And the truth is not private when it matters to justice. Then she turned to Mrs. Ezekiel. Her voice softened. Did anyone contact you and offer you money to drop this case? Mrs. Ezekiel nodded. She said a man called her 2 weeks earlier. He said he worked for Senator Whitmore. He offered her $2,000 if she signed a paper promising not to talk about Brandon or the case. Then he warned her. If she refused, things could become difficult. He mentioned immigration. He mentioned taxes. He mentioned her family. Judge Judy's eyes flashed. He threatened you with immigration enforcement? Mrs. Ezekiel's voice was quiet. Yes, Your Honor. She said the man told her to think about her grandchildren, to take the money, to forget everything. For a moment, the entire courtroom seemed frozen. Even Brandon looked shaken, as if he had not realized how far his father's people had gone to protect him. Judge Judy asked Mrs. Ezekiel what she told the caller. Mrs. Ezekiel straightened, and this time, her voice did not shake. She said she came to America 30 years ago. She worked 3 jobs. She saved every dollar. She became a citizen. She bought her properties legally. She followed every rule. Then she said something that silenced everyone. This country has law. Law should protect everybody, not only rich people with powerful fathers. The courtroom broke into applause. Judge Judy allowed it for a few seconds. Then she raised her hand. Silence returned. She looked back at Brandon. She asked him how he responded to the claim that his father's office tried to threaten an elderly immigrant woman into silence. His attorney jumped in again, saying Brandon had no knowledge of those communications. Judge Judy was not interested. Brandon had benefited from that protection his entire adult life. He could not suddenly pretend it had nothing to do with him. And then Brandon made the mistake that turned the whole case into something unforgettable. He stood up. His face was red. His pride was wounded. His arrogance, finally cornered, exploded. He said this was a circus. He said Judge Judy was trying to embarrass him on national television. Then he said the words that changed everything. "Do you know who my father is?" Judge Judy stood too. She was smaller than Brandon, but in that courtroom, she was the most powerful person in the room. "I know exactly who your father is," she said. "Sit down." Brandon did not sit. He shouted that his father had connections everywhere. Networks, advertisers, media companies, judicial committees. He said one phone call could end Judge Judy's show before dinner. The courtroom gasped. The bailiff stepped forward, ready to act. Judge Judy lifted one hand and stopped him. She wanted Brandon to finish, and he did. He called her just a TV judge. He said his father had real power, real judges, real lawyers, real politicians. He said when his father was done with her, she would be lucky to find work on daytime radio. The silence afterward was complete. Judge Judy looked at him calmly. And when she spoke, her voice was low, controlled, and devastating. She told him she had been a judge for over 25 years. She had handled real courts, real criminals, real threats. She had dealt with people who had actually been dangerous. Then she looked Brandon directly in the eye. "And you think a spoiled little boy with a powerful father is going to intimidate me?" No one moved. Brandon's face drained. Judge Judy continued. She said he had just made the biggest mistake of his privileged life. Not only would she rule against him, but every second of his threat would be seen by the public. Then came the ruling. Judgment for Mrs. Ezekiel. Full amount $8,500, plus court costs. But Judge Judy was not finished. She said she would forward the transcript and related materials to the proper authorities for review. She said intimidation, misuse of political office, and threats against a witness were not small matters. Brandon's attorney looked defeated. Brandon looked stunned. Mrs. Ezekiel covered her mouth with one hand, fighting tears. Judge Judy looked at her and said simply that the law belonged to her too, not to politicians, not to rich sons, not to people who used power as a weapon, to everyone. And that was the lesson Brandon Whitmore learned too late. He entered the courtroom believing his father's name would protect him. He left knowing that arrogance can become evidence, that threats can become public record, and that sometimes the person you try to intimidate is the one person you should have feared most. Because in Judge Judy's courtroom, money did not speak louder than truth. Power did not erase responsibility. And a last name, no matter how famous, meant absolutely nothing when the facts were staring everyone in the face.